All right, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome our second speaker, Debbie Fields. Debbie Fields is Assistant Professor of Instructional Technologies and Learning Sciences at Utah State University. Her work examines, tell you what, I'm loud. I'm going to try it without this mic. All right. Her work examines the power of connected learning by studying how students' learning is enriched when school, home, friends, and playful online spaces are combined. Her work focuses on the creative objects that students make and how their interests, physical and virtual communities, and identities come into play by design decisions. She's the co-author of a fairly new book called Connected Play: Tween Life in a Virtual World, which was published by MIT Press, and she left some flyers out at the registration tables for that book. And it is the culmination of an impressively, we were all very jealous last night when she described it, an impressively large amount of data over a decade's worth of information of how kids play, learn, and develop in virtual worlds. She's also co-author of a second book, Kids Online, a new research agenda for understanding social networking forums. Please join me in welcoming Debbie Fields.
Thank you for the invitation, for being here today. I am completely going to admit this is not my normal audience and this is not my normal scholarly community. I have a lot of friends in literacy. I have a couple friends in like second language acquisition kind of stuff, but I come more from learning sciences. I do a lot of stuff with kids learning about computer science and engineering, studying learning across spaces in their lives. But I was invited, so I'm hoping that there's something that everyone will be able to get from a little bit of cross-disciplinary work. I'm going to share some ideas that I think are provocative, and you will have to help me figure out what the connection is to the areas that you study in. I won't be able to do that for you since I am not super familiar with this area, although I love seeing activity theory diagrams and stuff like that. Okay, so here's my slightly mischievous idea. That cheating can be a kind of new literacy, important for navigating digital media, digital spaces, and everyday life, even school, if we think about it in a particular way. So my argument comes from observations from children's play cultures online and in games. And all too often, it's sort of interesting, we tend to focus only on the academic side of things when we think about learning, without looking at what kids or students or adults in general might already be doing that would have value. What if we began by actually looking at play cultures and what those have to show us about learning? Maybe we'll find something that'll help us design better and more culturally relevant learning environments. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some play culture that my colleagues and I observed studying a virtual world for children, and the idea that we can learn from cheating and when we might learn from cheating and what kinds of opportunities we might find in this. So let's start with just understanding play. What do we know about play culture, and in particular some of the new playgrounds for millions of kids that they engage in? As it turns out, we know very, very little about what children do online. That's why a lot of my focus is on children online. But gratefully for you, you have me, intrepid researcher who spent a large chunk of time in the last decade hanging out with kids in a virtual world called Yville, W-H-Y. Yville, you can all go there, but maybe not right now. It's a virtual world for teens that's been around since the late 90s, funded by Caltech researchers to provide access to informal science games and hanging out with other kids. So millions of kids, 2/3 of them girls, which is especially exciting given trends we know about kids' participation online and particular science kinds of things, hang out there. So my colleagues and I'm going to mention my colleague Yasmin Kafai, spent years studying Yville, what kids do, what they learn. I have a whole book, and I've sort of picked a fun section that I thought would be applicable here, but if you want to know about avatars, identity, issues of race, flirting, science learning, or just kind of play, we've written about it all. So part I'm going to talk about today is cheating, in particular the cheat sites that kids develop to share tips, tricks, and hints and answers about what to do and how to succeed in Yville. So I'm proposing today that cheating might be a type of new literacy. Learning how to find cheats, create them, use them, share them, figuring out when you want to use them for your greatest enjoyment or learning. And maybe even how to play the game of school, right? Not just how to play games online, because let's not pretend that school isn't at least sometimes a game. It's also funny. So cheating in games is a very common practice. There are tons of guides and sites devoted to finding, sharing, organizing cheats for games. You can use cheats to give you super power-ups, hidden secret rewards in games, unlimited health or wealth, temporary god powers, or even just walkthroughs showing you how to get through that level that you really just can't do no matter how hard you try. Mia Consalvo considers knowing what cheats to use and when a kind of gaming capital. She's got a whole book on cheating. Cheats allow you to customize and play the game the way you want. If you're stuck, it's a way to get past that stuck point. If you don't want to play within the rules of the game, cheats can allow you to play your own way. This is obviously different from school, but we're still looking at kids' play cultures, and there's something about also thinking about the rules of school or the rules of whatever sort of institutional life you have, and you might be able to break them a little bit, because some people have figured that out. Also, cheats aren't just found in magazines and online websites. In a way, just watching someone else play who's better than you or who's been farther than you is a kind of a cheat, right? People often stereotype video games as very individualistic things, but most kids play them together, either physically present, like these two boys, they're brothers online, which you can barely see that picture, but trust me, there's two boys poring over a cheat guide trying to figure out what they're going to do. I like to sort of think about the cheats we find in everyday life, particularly walkthroughs that include instructions on how to do things like a cooking recipe. You want to know how to make that amazing dish that your friend made last week. You ask him or her for the recipe. Maybe you call them for tips. You get a lesson. What do you do when you're in a new town and you want to find the best places to visit? You don't have to do everything the hard way. You don't have to learn everything from scratch. You can find a travel guide, or you can go on Yelp like I did to find all the cool places to eat in Tucson. So let me show you what some cheats look like for some of the science games in Yville, and we can think about the possibilities. So in this game, it's called the zero gravity game. The sides of the hockey rink blink. One side, like that yellow side, might blink. And then you have to get over there by throwing an object one way, and then you move the other way. Okay? And you throw it by degrees. So it's completely Newton's laws, equal opposite reaction. You're in a quasi-frictionless virtual environment. So I can throw a mud ball or a snowball at 180, and then I can move 0. And you do this with degrees in a circle. Which is really hard if you're a kid and you aren't quite familiar with what angle 245 or 190 degrees is, even as an adult, where you don't usually use those angles in everyday life. So the cheat that some kids came up with is this. Instructions on how to throw things and a lovely diagram of degrees in a circle. So it definitely helps in playing the game. It's a lovely mathematical representation, and yay, learning. Here's an example of a thoughtful, intellectually challenging game where the cheat is really boring. So based on information, the game is hard. Based on information about when and where the sun rises and sets and a couple of hints, you have to figure out what time of year it is and where in the world this is, okay? So check out the answer though. It's a list of information, month, day, and location, okay? So the cheat's a list of answers. Whereas in the zero gravity game, you might learn something from applying that cheat by looking at that diagram. In this one, you don't get anything out of it. You just write down the answers. So those are a couple of examples of science games and cheats that kids have developed in Yville. And now I want to show you how the kids are making them. It's a quite collaborative kind of thing. So I'm going to give an illustration of the development of a cheat by kids. For a number of months, we studied a particularly active Yville cheat site, a place we call gamesite.net. It was ranked as one of the 2 best cheat sites for Yville, and it was a very active collaborative space. So it was owned and maintained by a 14-year-old and his 3 administrators. It had cheats for, at the time, all of the 20 salary-raising science games in Yville, because you play the games, you get money, and then you can buy clothes on Yville. So it's what high priority is. They also had cultural hints and tips, okay, where to hang out, what the best shops were, how to, you could actually advertise on the site for your own face parts that you might be selling for avatars, and it had an active forum for cheat development. Okay, so on August 13th, a new game, long time ago, showed up on Yville. It's called the Spitzer Spectrometer. Now, I'm the daughter of an astronomer who actually works in the building next door. And I was thrilled to play a spectroscopy game. So here's how it works. So basically, each element, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, has a particular light signature that you can see on that bottom. There's 2 rows. One's dark right now, and then one has all these little lights. You take light, you spread it out into a rainbow, and it's like a fingerprint for an element. So this is a matching game. You go through all the elements and you find a match for that particular spectrum on the bottom. So you just cycle through all the materials until you get it. Originally, you had to get 5 spectra in 2 minutes, and there were about 30 elements. That is impossible. No one that I know memorizes spectra. Maybe a few people memorize a few that you just figure out what all, but that's an intense visual pattern. So I couldn't even finish the game successfully, so the game was begging for a cheat. So on game site, the site owner issued a call to figure out how to cheat this game. They're like, we can't figure out how to cheat it, so we need your help, and we are gonna offer 2,000 clams and 3,000 clams if you can figure it out quickly. That is a lot of money on Yville. That's like, right now it would take me 100 days to earn that if I logged in every day. So that's like a month of daily logins, and with the highest salary possible, which these people apparently had. So 1 week later, they obviously didn't qualify for 3,000 clams. A member posted an idea. She didn't think it was much of a cheat, but it was helpful. So let's look at what it was. Okay, it was a self-created scientific reference guide. She took screenshots of each element, labeled them with the element, and now everyone has a reference guide that allowed them to play it faster. When I think of science learning, this is what it is, right? It's like, oh, we need something, we're going to create that resource, great. Unfortunately, or at least sadly to us, not long after this cheat was created, Yville decided the game was too hard, so they simplified it by simply deleting a bunch of the elements so that you didn't have to cycle through as many. But what if that happened? What if we created games intended for cheats, designed so that kids would learn from creating and using cheats? So it's kind of a backwards kind of design. What if we designed games, and what if we designed classrooms or learning experiences that were intended to have people cheat them? How would we design them, right? Bad cheats, good cheats. This is a quote from one of my favorite scholars, Jim G., where he imagined way back in 2003, well, what if learners were writing walkthroughs according to strict norms and debating them and figuring out what it would be in science class or what it would be in a language learning class? I've done that in my own graduate classes. I've asked students to get into small groups during class and figure out how they can cheat this class, and after they get over their shock and awe and fear of what I've just asked them to do, it's kind of interesting. I asked them to do in the spirit of the course. Now, if I happened to measure learning through multiple choice tests that had one right answer, that would be a very bad idea because they probably wouldn't learn anything by applying those cheats. But what they tend to do is they share reading strategies. They try to figure out, okay, well, grad school's hard, undergrad's hard, there's so much stuff to do. How do you prioritize? What parts of the text do you read first? How do you start learning things by author rather than by article? What questions does the professor ask at every single class? Which if I'm asking good questions, then great, they'll be thinking ahead of those. They talked about sharing notes, meeting together, sharing expertise, getting different perspectives. So I think there can be learning and cheating. So, how can we take advantage of this mischievous play? One of the new things that I'm doing is, if you want to bring cheating into serious gaming, you have to give people the tools to create and share them. Here's where I think play and design can come together. There are a growing number of websites where kids aged, let's say 6 to 18, can create and share their own do-it-yourself or DIY media. Right now I'm studying like a comparative study of 120 of these sort of sites. They can provide community spaces to make, share, critique creations, and we're sort of looking at, which sites provide transparency into the process of making, which sites provide actually some social commentary so people can comment on them, what are kids' rights over the things they design. You can look at our website if you're interested in this cool project. So this was the challenge that Chantel and John emailed us in thinking about preparing for this symposium. How do we develop new understandings of the ways we acquire and evaluate knowledge and communicate? I've argued that I think cheating is one way that people can build knowledge, developing things that they can share with people. Maybe it's called a cheat, maybe it's called a recipe book, maybe it's called figuring out your class. It's also connective, right? So the idea of cheating connects to kids' play cultures and video games and virtual spaces. It's a little mischievous. It gets people to think about the rules within which they operate and how to think outside those rules. I haven't spent a lot of time in this presentation getting into the ethical dilemmas of cheating. There are obviously ethical dilemmas in cheating. It's one thing to maybe figure out how to play a game. It's another to lie to someone and try to steal their money, which I have seen kids do. And so, you know, most gamers are aware there are people who've ruined the game for others. But I think that's also an opportunity. I work mostly with children, and the opportunity to engage them in spaces where the consequences for being mean to each other are maybe a little less than everyday school or relationships. It's a great opportunity, and so I think there's an opportunity to think about those ethics and think about, you know, when do you cheat? What does good cheating mean? When is it in the spirit of the game or learning or social justice or something like that? Okay, here's a little example, right? Okay, kids on Yville and in probably every virtual environment that exists can figure out how to bypass chat filters. One of the coolest things I've seen in Yville is there's kids and then they have little chat bubbles, okay? So they wanted to say something naughty, and so you have one kid here saying be you, the next one here, TT, and the next one here, head, okay? Spells it all out. It's very collaborative, it's very clever. But in some cultures, bypassing chat filters is actually like a means of social justice, right? And so, you know, it's how you use it and it's when you use it. So here we've come full circle, start to study kids' play cultures to learn how to better design learning cultures. And in turn, we can think about creating and studying play and design cultures online and in classrooms. So I hope that you will think critically about the designs of your classrooms, maybe even games, maybe even the designs of your conferences. I hope that you will consider doing this ethically within the spirit of the game, with the spirit of learning and social justice, even if this might actually go against the technical rules of whatever institution we're in at the time. I hope you'll think about creating connections between kids' play and your own play, or between people's lives and the knowledge and the opportunities that they bring, everyday cultures, whether online or in person. And I hope that whether you're teaching, research, or designing, you'll challenge you to be a little mischievous for the rest of this conference and in your everyday life. So thank you.